This is Justice Worriers, a podcast where we think about things that are right and wrong in our world and how Christian ideas can help us respond to them. We prefer hard questions over easy answers, and we'd love you to join us in our ramblings. Listen in and contact us using the links in the show notes. Hello and welcome to Justice Warriors episode 43. My name's Andy and as usual I'm joined by Leah. Say hi, Leah.
Hi there.
And Jörg. Say hi, Jörg.
Hello.
And this week only one of us had some homework and needs some help with it. So Jörg, could you tell us what your homework is, please?
Well, my homework was to bring a problem to the podcast or something. And, well, I don't need to help bring a problem to the podcast. I can do that by myself. No, actually, I mean, we talked about, some things we want to talk about. And I said, I have this passage I have to preach on and I'm struggling with it. I understand the text. I just don't know what to do with it. And I thought you guys might help me to make my problems better. Because as we know, in Justice Warriors, we always land on something in the end. And, we unpack a problem and then we provide a solution. So if you could help me write my sermon so it's nice and snappy and has a good end, so that would be really, really helpful. So if you can help me do my homework for the church.
So our goal is to leave you just in a puddle on the floor, just with absolutely no idea what you're doing. And feeling like you can never preach a sermon again.
That's right. And along the way, kind of, maybe the one spark that will turn into something else. But yeah, or just complain and moan, and then I'll just do a sort of standard message on the sermon that you've heard many times before as a revenge upon you.
Oh, thanks. Okay, so we'll start with the passage. So shall I read it out?
Maybe let me say, so this is part of a series on, I think it's called like a discipleship toolkit. Maybe we can unpack this a little bit as well, whether, we can toolkit disciples. But the topic that I was given was silence and solitude, which I think is great. I love silence and solitude, something I rarely achieve, but that's an academic problem. But I was given this passage for it from Mark 6, and I'm struggling to connect it except for one little verse, and I just thought we might take this apart a bit.
I like the fact that Justice Warriors are being given the task of dealing with an absence in a toolkit, or putting an absence into a toolkit. I think that's a very nice place to start.
Yeah, that's right. And spending an hour talking about silence, right? I mean, we could just
about nothing.
Practice it. But,
yeah.
Yeah, if there are any silences, I will cut them out of the podcast, of course.
There you go.
Yeah, I think we can talk about nothing better than we can be silent.
Oh, yeah.
The three of us.
That's true.
That will be fine.
Yeah.
The Lord will see our nothing and take it as silence.
Yeah, okay, good.
All right, so I'll read the passage, and listener, if you would like to join in with us in understanding whether we can derive any kind of meaning whatsoever from this thing, then keep listening. So the passage is Mark 6, verses 45 to 56. And it goes like this. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars, because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass them by, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out, because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they'd not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. When they'd crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret and anchored there. As soon as they got out of the boat, people recognized Jesus. They ran throughout that whole region and carried the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages, towns or countryside, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. They begged him to let them touch even the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed.
We go, the power of silence makes miracles. Yeah, so that's the passage. And we talk about silence, and calming the seas. That's how we talk about it. Jesus calms the seas, and you can sort of make it metaphorical or something. But I don't know. I find it an irritating story.
Why irritating?
Well, first of all, you have to wrestle with the miracle itself, right? So what are we looking at? Are we thinking that this is what we're supposed to learn from that Jesus so powerfully walks on the water? Or is it like just a sort of story that emerged out of the church reflecting on its loneliness after Easter and the Ascension? That, was it meant metaphorically from the beginning, or are we to learn from this story that he commands the elements?
Yeah, but only when it's kind of inconvenient because he wants to catch up with the boat.
Yeah, and then he calms the water as well. So,
or is it? No, actually, that's unfair. He noticed they were in trouble and wanted to go out to them.
Yeah. And yeah, so what do you do with that? Are we saying, the sort of straightforward Sunday school reading is you can trust God with everything. He has control over everything. And of course, the way this is placed in Mark is exactly that. So we have the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus has just kind of multiplied magically the elements, of bread and fish. And
yeah, it even says here they'd not understood about the loaves.
Exactly. So now they understand, okay, he gets it. The disciples get it. He has full control. He's like omnipotent, can do anything he wants. He can conjure up bread, walk on water, calm the waves. And they get it. And then he crosses over. And as soon as they get out of the boat, Jesus goes into the sort of healing superhero and just touches everybody, and everybody gets healed. That's fine. That's a fine reading. It comes with a price, I guess, that you kind of say, well, this is what the Bible tells us. It's not always our experience. And when you reflect on it theologically, it comes with a whole bunch of theodicy. If he can calm the waves and the elements, I could think of a few events in history where that would have been useful. So what are we then preaching on this? Trust Jesus with all of your problems, because if he can calm the waves and bring bread, you just pray. Is that a message I want to be preaching in Tigray today, where we just learned, a week ago, that about 400 people died of hunger in a month?
Or the Christians in Bethlehem.
Or the Christians in Bethlehem, or anybody in Bethlehem, exactly. Or is this the message you sort of unpack after tsunami, and all of a sudden that kind of falls apart?
Right. So the kind of the standard message of Jesus has magical powers, is that the standard message anyway? The kind of plain reading is Jesus has magical powers. It's problematic not only because that's kind of so what, but also the only so what there is like, well, why isn't he using them?
Yeah. And my suspicion is this has made it into the discipleship toolkit, not just because he calms the water, but because of the passage that he goes on the mountainside and prayed. So that's like his refueling station. And then the sort of straightforward message for that kind of application would be, do it like Jesus. If you have your quiet time every day, anything's possible, because he'll be with you. And I don't know.
So another reading could be a little bit like you just alluded to, Andy, with it linking back to the loaves and the fishes, that, it's kind of, the disciples still didn't get it, is that this is all about Jesus demonstrating, all the writers, or Mark, writing the gospel, demonstrating that Jesus was God and that Jesus had the same powers as God.
Okay.
Does that put a slightly different
it's
spin
definitely
on it?
better
That
than
it's not
magical powers.
It's not necessarily about the way that Jesus might act through us now. It's the fact that he was on the earth as God. Does that move it forward at all, or?
I'm not sure it moves forward the silence thing. I think it moves forward. Like, I think it makes it easier to engage with this passage because if it's basically kind of presenting you with proof that Jesus is God, then I kind of see the value of that.
But does that make my theodicy problem go away?
I don't think your theodicy problem, as you describe it, which is everybody's theodicy problem, is helped by any of the gospel stories, really, is it? So, I mean, if the theodicy problem on its own is enough to make stuff not useful, then you might as well forget enormous swathes of the Bible.
Well, I think there is a way in which it's helpful. Maybe we're going completely off topic, but I think the fact that Jesus didn't fix everything in the world, but went to individual people and did individual things, maybe doesn't solve the problem of why doesn't God fix everything, but it kind of provides us with a framework for talking about it, maybe.
I mean, if Jesus' point was to come and make everybody well and happy again, then it wouldn't have been dependent on whether they touched his cloak or not when they were healed, right? Yeah. So already in there's that says, and all who touched him were made well. So that's that kind of, that's an instant nod to the fact that he was in one place at one time.
Yeah.
And only, so there were people who didn't get there on time because their illness was too bad. And there were people who, desperately wanted to be there and couldn't because, the bus was late. But it's not. But
the donkey was late.
They had to go and do something else. And
but again, why this form? So, in a way, where do you take that to in preaching? So make sure you're not late. You go to Jesus with your problem, touch him, wait for him in the silence. It'll all be okay. I mean,
be aware that even though Jesus was God and Jesus could do absolutely amazing things, and Jesus went to the refuel station and did all that that we're being encouraged to do, even with all that, there were still some people who didn't get healed.
Well, even then. Many. Yeah.
Yeah, many people who weren't healed.
That's a great downbeat message. I like it.
Yeah, cheery. Hey?
All right.
It's just because I've got a stinky cold, so
all right. So
I'm not feeling very in the healing mood.
Are you going to bring up death today then?
No, I'm not going to die. I've just got a cold, man.
I tried. Come on.
Those that died by wearing the badge, they're the chosen ones. Those who died are justified for wearing the badge, they're the chosen ones. They're justified. Those that died, they're the chosen ones.
So I'm really interested in what you said, Leah, because that's how I would like to read the passage through absences, and I think once you do that, and that's I've preached on this once before in German, and that's what I ended up doing. It becomes really interesting because first of all, you ask yourself the question. So Jesus has this big win, right? You get 5,000 people together, you feed them. What's the next thing? Show us your restaurant. Hang around here. This is good. We could all sit here and enjoy this. And the next thing he does is leave his disciples alone. Instead of celebrating this win together, instead of them getting to ask all their questions about what just happened and why they're collecting these 12 baskets when there were only these 5 loaves or whatever, the sort of getting to the bottom of the miracle or anything. He just kind of goes, you get in the boat, go on ahead, I'm going to leave you. And he goes up on the mountainside to pray, and he's God again for a moment, or he's with God or whatever. He's just removed. And the church is alone, or if you read it metaphorically, so they're straining against the wind. And, by the way, there's all this sort of imagery of the Sea of Galilee just being in these huge waves. I mean, the whole thing isn't that big, but I can get behind the straining of the winds, not the sort of some of the depiction of vessel in high water. But anyway, and then when he comes toward them, they don't recognize him. There's a really interesting absence here. They think he was a ghost. And they cried out because they're terrified. And there's something there about this ghostliness that I recognize. because one example I used in that sermon is a story that I can still see in my head. It's like, this is in the early 2000s, I'm getting a mini taxi in Ethiopia. There's an old lady that just asks, in the name of Mary, can you give me some cash? Like, she's a local beggar. And I give her something and I say to her, God bless you, mother, like very respectful. And she smiles at me and it feels like we're connecting. And it's a beautiful moment. And immediately I get ripped out of like, are you even serious? Are you seeing what just happened? You gave her something that you could lose. Like, the global injustice has moved away. She's just begging. You just thought you had a moment, but really it isn't. You're fooled. You saw a ghost. There's nothing here. There's no substance. You haven't solved anything. This old lady has probably died of pain, like a dear friend's mother-in-law of mine who couldn't get the medication and screamed through nights before she passed away. And here I'm sitting, using her story as an illustration in a sermon. Man, that was a real ghost. And I want to cry. I'm terrified. That's not the story I want. I want things fixed. And here we have this mirage of Jesus coming toward us and making things better. Like that really gets me. And that's where I'm with the disciples. I'm like, I don't want this. This is weird.
But in the story, it is Jesus and he climbs into the boat.
Yes. And then it all goes poof. And my angle, like, well, in some ways it gets worse because you got to accept it. It's not going to be complete. Jesus will appear as a mirage. He will be that sort of presence absence. That's the story of the church. You have these beautiful moments and then it all falls apart. You have Acts 4 and then you have Ananias and Sapphira. And once you say yes to that, the waves calm. And that's the thing I'm struggling with here. Anyway, does that reading even make sense to you, or is it too far out? But I love the image of the ghost.
I think it's unsatisfying, because the story is saying the opposite. But I think your story, that your moment with that woman, I don't think it was a mirage. I think that's what we are as people. We connect. We're here to connect with other people. Now, obviously, that's imperfect in all kinds of ways.
So the ghost story works. The ghost is the real thing.
Yeah, so maybe it does work. Yeah, like you thought you were seeing a ghost, but actually you saw the real Jesus.
This is so hard to accept, though, isn't it? To say, be happy with these little moments, like, especially if you turn it into a justice issue.
It doesn't necessarily mean that.
I like the theme, though, of absences, that this is a story about things that aren't there, and a meeting with God that we don't really hear the detail of, that Jesus is away doing that. He's not present with us. He's not present with his disciples, and that sense of silence as those times when it doesn't feel like God is speaking to you, and it doesn't feel like God's close, and you do feel like you're there in the boat on your own. I don't know.
And they were
on their own.
But also Jesus was kind of closer than they thought, or something.
Yeah.
Right?
And even in a situation where they were genuinely walking with the incarnate God, still even then there were absences, there was confusion, there was there was worry, there was feeling alone. So how much more would we in this day and age experience those kind of feelings and those times when
that's what I ended up thinking about in that other sermon as well. Like, I connected it to the story of Emmaus, because the one major kernel of truth behind the resurrection stories for me is all this stuff about Jesus not being recognizable, going through walls, having this ghostly presence himself. Like, if the resurrection stories ended in him like coming like Alexander the Great, yes, they touch him, but him like, then riding into Jerusalem and everybody seeing him, you'd be like, well, why haven't I heard of this? But what turns it into this really weird story of faith is that you don't know with the resurrected Jesus, am I seeing a vision or is it the real thing? Yes, I can touch it, but why did it just come through walls?
Just to interrupt, the story you're talking about, comparing it with, is where the two disciples meet Jesus after his crucifixion and don't recognize him until much later.
That's one story, right? So they don't recognize him until much later. He explains the entire scriptures to them. They still don't get it. Like at that point, the story's written in such a way they're like, dumb ones, why don't you get it? And then the moment they get it, he disappears before their eyes.
Right.
Yeah. Right? What does Mary say?
Mary in the garden.
The gardener.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when the Emmaus disciples run back, Jesus suddenly appears in their midst. He appears to Paul as the last one, as Paul says. So, I'm not too keen on the ascension story, but actually there's a sort of because that feels too much like a bookend, like make the visions go away. He's now in heaven. He's very rarely coming down. But the story of the early church was, wait, put his body down. It's gone now. And then we have to live with this Jesus appearing. We're just fishing on the lake and suddenly he's there on the shores, encouraging us to fish. Then we recognize him. We jump out of the boat, but he already has fish. He's frying on the fire. I mean, all of the resurrection stories work in this like really weird presence-absence kind of thing. And that's the only way I can read this story here, that this is the church already reflecting on the existence of disciples. Like, this is going to be your story. You're going to have these amazing things. You're going to have everybody putting everything together, and suddenly you have enough to feed the poor. And then you're going to feel terribly alone again. You're going to have a notion of presence, or you're going to be scared of something and you realize it's Jesus.
Can I talk about something that goes off in a totally different direction that may end up linking back in or might not be anything to do with it? So one really strong thing that I see in this passage is that whole idea that the sea was kind of traditionally this idea that it was somewhere that was scary and foreboding and a place where evil dwelt, and it was nature kind of red in tooth and claw, and that there's a real like separating of, or a real setting of kind of humans against nature. Nature is the threat, and Jesus comes and like reinforces that whole nature is threatening, but I'm here to help you kind of subdue nature, which, as we know from the current climate crisis, is not a terribly helpful way that people have felt about our relationship with nature. Does this story give us anything helpful in that, or does it just reinforce that whole sense?
That's interesting. It's interesting that you're putting the water together with nature, right? Because for me, I guess I'd always thought of that thing as being, the water is like kind of outside of nature. Like the land is a safe and good place, and the water is the chaos and danger that's out of our control. So I hadn't thought of it as being like Jesus having control over nature, but rather having control over chaos, I guess, or something like that.
That's interesting.
Which makes it a bit less problematic from that point of view.
Yeah.
But I think it takes us deeper into Jörg's problem with the metaphorical reading of this, which is essentially you will be up against storms in life, and then what's the next thing? But then Jesus will magically appear and it will all be fine? And Jörg, you had a particular storm that you were thinking of this week. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about, let me take us there somewhere differently. So you could then say, There will be storms, and you will not want to recognize that Jesus comes toward you. There may be signs of hope, and you think they're mirage. You think they're just you fooling yourself. You might be up against it, but you should take heart nonetheless, with the little hope that you see, whatever, and invite Jesus in the boat.
Be on the lookout for
Be on the
Jesus.
lookout. And once you do that, once you accept that the thing that you think is never going to fix it, or the sort of presence you're feeling isn't enough, once you accept that and you say, no, it's not a ghost, it's actually Jesus, he comes in the boat and he makes you nice and calm. That would be then one reading I could take. It's like, you got to plug into this presence, absence of Jesus, and just accept that and let yourself fall into his story. Great landing spot. But then I
knew there was a but coming. Yeah, that was never going to be the end of the story.
That's right. You never know. And then I thought, okay, so is that the message? We all get our nice little calm, quiet time at home. And I know, my own spiritual practice, when I do take the time to do that, is actually, that's the best way for me. To let all the thoughts run wild, be quiet, like read a sort of passage before, like the sort of Richard Rohr type meditation, and then 20 minutes of silence, just sitting there. And trying to think of the thing I just read, but not forcing myself in any which direction. So I know that's calming and so on. So great. So maybe that's the message. This is the discipleship toolkit. Accept that you're not in control, that Jesus' presence will be fleeting, but he can still calm the waves in your heart. And now this video that you also saw, Leah, that came out this week. I saw yesterday, and it speaks to this sort of mind-numbing brutality that we're seeing these days. Led by donkeys, laid out a line of children's clothes on the southern beach of England somewhere, which is 5 kilometers long. And then they flew a drone along it. And this is about the line of, if you count the children that died in this conflict that we're seeing right now in Israel, Gaza.
Something like 11,000 Palestinian and 46 Israeli.
30 or 46 Israeli children. And, you scroll further down there, you see lots of whataboutism. I'm really not interested in any of this. Let's just focus on and seeing those clothes. And somebody there posted Ellen Cordy and said it used to be one child that made us cry. And of these children, we don't even know the names. And you just fly this drone along, you see this line, and you just, like, the horror is not graspable. And then everything against me rebels, is like, I don't want to be silent. I don't want to be silent in that. Like, if this is a Justice Worriers kind of message, I cannot land on this will make you calm.
Yeah.
But maybe the purpose isn't to make you calm. The purpose is to de-center ourselves. So that's why I find that kind of prayer helpful, because the other kind of prayer is needed and is, God, this is terrible and I need you to do something about this. And that might be things in my personal life. That might be like, things in the world at large. And it's all from me and my feelings. And then the silence allows me to go, well, okay, I'm like this teeny weeny little speck in all this. And I don't even know how to pray about it. God, it's like the silence at the end of a rage, isn't it? Like, well, I'm spent.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you can end up in that activism space, which is all white saviorism and constant putting yourself in the center of the picture. And I've got to fix this, and God, we've got to fix this together. And the silence does allow you to. The purpose isn't to make me feel happy and calm and so I can go about my day without feeling stressed. It's to give me a space where I go, okay, God, even the words that I can try and say to you to try and help make this better are ridiculous and pathetic.
That's really good.
That's really interesting. I don't think I've ever had any understanding of what silence is for. Like, I've had this sense that it's probably good, and I've tried to do it at various times. I'm not sure I've experienced that decentering, but it's really quite helpful for me to hear that might be a purpose for it, because that sounds like a really, really good thing. I'd like to be able to somehow do some decentering. I think when I'm silent, I'm still the center. I'm still whirring away.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard, and I'm terrible at it, but it's something that I kind of... Because otherwise there's like a million voices of Leah in my head going, oh, you could just do this, and God, if you just did that, and Leah, you could do this, and we could just fix it this way, and wouldn't it be great if so-and-so did this, and isn't it awful the way so-and-so's doing that, and Lord, please, and it's all... I'm in the middle of this universe trying to find some agency in a situation that I really have almost no agency.
So seeing silence as an acknowledgement of that lack of agency, or just that the fact that you're just a part of the world, not running it. That seems like a good purpose.
And Leah, you made my mind spin. That's really great, because I mean, there's another thing that bothers me, which has the same ghostly qualities. Seeing all this suffering posted online. And, it's the same in the Ethiopia conflict. It's the same in Ukraine. It's everywhere. There's exactly that same ghostliness that we're mourning a life that's passed, and in the same moment that life is being instrumentalized for a different message. And it's almost as if I cannot have that life just for itself. It's always going to mean something now. And so there's a death in this. Like a double death, or like a ghostly presence at the moment that you mourn somebody who you didn't really know. And they've become a token, like my little poor mother begging in the name of Miriam, become a token for something else. And that's exactly that decentering you were talking about as well. So are we maybe, and really just a thought experiment, are we maybe even actually to take the silence and spin ourselves into the ghostliness of Jesus and realize there's nothing much of us. Our future is to be like Jesus. This sort of presence absence, this no longer in control of our story. I'm going to say a dead one day.
Which doesn't a small step from ghosts to dead, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, anyway, so this sort of, like, our lives won't be gone, but they will have that ghostly presence that whatever it is, it's going to be absorbed into God, and it's not going to be in our control. It's not going to be. So is that maybe the point of silence, and the point of the story is to realize not Jesus has the power over everything, but Jesus has the power over everything. You don't. Nobody does. If anything, it's just God. It's the entire story. It's not... Yeah, anyway.
Have we talked about that book, Cloud Atlas, on the podcast before? I feel like we might have done.
I don't know. I've read it. I love it.
I feel like you might have mentioned it, but I've forgotten if you did.
So I think it's one where the film was actually better than the book, because it talks about different stories of resistance and rebellion and attempts at liberation in various oppressive situations, but it's lots of different stories, and they're all cleverly interwoven in the book. But what the film brings out more clearly, because it uses the same actors in each of the different stories as they're set in different historical times, and it actually, to me, brings out this beautiful sense of the same struggles, the same fights, the same in all these situations in the book. I think ultimately doomed. I don't think they're not like, they're not the fights for liberation that end in the overthrow of the Nazis or whatever. They're the fights for liberation that end most often from what I remember in
death or something.
In death. Yeah, and the people die.
But the string of fights goes on. Like, the liberation struggle doesn't end. So it's like...
You go. You explain it better.
No, that's just... that's exactly the interesting thing, that you realize, you think, like, is this some sort of reincarnation? But that's not quite the point it makes. It's just like these situations return, and that sort of striving for freedom, for something else, doesn't end. And it's a story from 16th century, some sort of sailing boat and enslavement, all the way to like some futuristic episodes years ago that I read it. But really interesting, then you realize actually the individual acts don't matter. The story isn't played out by the individual acts. The actors or the sort of individual characters are just copies of a story that's much larger than themselves.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
But I don't know, are we straying too far from the story of Jesus in the boat?
Yeah, that was going to be my question. How do we get to this from that? I wanted to bring up another point. Maybe it's just completely irrelevant, but it struck me when we think about what Jesus did when he withdrew to pray. It kind of strikes me a bit like it's more of a compulsion than a choice. They need to get going to go over to the other side of the lake. But Jesus just needs to get away. If he's had all these people listening to everything he's saying and stuff like that, it must be utterly exhausting.
So is that our image of God, are you saying? I love that.
Well,
every now and again he really gets tired and he brings on floods and says, I'm going to destroy you good for this time. But again, it's great because that's human experience. Like, this is why these Old Testament stories are awesome, because people are saying, this is what God's doing to us. Like, they're not imagining a perfect God. They're not living in this sort of this Greek space of an idea that is so perfect.
They're not imagining a perfect world.
Exactly.
And they're just engaged. God fits into the fact that there's not a perfect world. We're very much in danger of basically imagining a perfect world in our heads, and then basically ignoring the bits of the world that don't fit with.
And that's what makes our theology so unrealistic, right? Like, because we have this idea of the perfect that we want to translate out to the earth, and then we struggle with the psalmists or a lamentation or whatever, these different passages where somebody says, like, we're talking about one like this, like, you've hit me in the chin, right?
I've still got it open. Lamentations 3. Which
I was given as an auxiliary passage for this sermon.
So you're actually given this as another passage. So just before the bit you were given, which is a nice, calm, peaceful bit about God's love, verse 16 says, "He has broken my teeth with gravel, he has trampled me in the dust," which is probably one of my favourite verses in the Bible.
Yeah, I have been deprived of peace. I've forgotten what prosperity is. So I say my splendor is gone and all that I'd hoped from the Lord. And then a little bit on it says, because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They're new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to the Lord, to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for him. It's either the story of an idiot who doesn't understand that that's not how the world works and tries the same thing over and over again, even though they've just realized, or it's an extremely realistic theology that says, I'm just never going to figure this thing out, but it's because of...
And you skipped over the decision point. So you're a little unfair.
Go on.
Well, in the middle, between those two bits, verse 21 says, "Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we're not consumed." So it's a conscious decision to call to mind this faith.
I remember my affliction, my wandering, the bitterness and the gall, I remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. I don't want the ghost, because that's not the story. Yet this I call to mind. Because of the Lord's great love, we're not consumed. His compassions never fail. But it's a theology that's greater than that. I like this sentence, because of the Lord's great love, we're not consumed. Like, he's going to be rough, but he's not going to kill me. But then you kind of... okay, this is horrible. Like, we've read, where's the verse with the prosperity? I've been deprived of peace. I've forgotten what prosperity is. That's verse 17. And then 25, the Lord is good to those whose hope is in him, to the one who seeks him. It is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. Is this not, like, either you can say, this is somebody saying, well, I just got to return to that hope. And then I think you're just peddling cheap hope. It's going to be okay in the end. see it through. Prosperity will come your way.
And it sounds like someone who's under like coercive control, right? They briefly complain and then they're like, oh, but actually,
That's
I
right.
still love
Stockholm
them.
syndrome.
They love me really.
Yeah.
They didn't mean it.
Or could we read it as a sort of a realistic theology that says it's always going to be a little bit of both and you're never going to get your handle on it?
And I will make the decision to look for it.
I was going to say one thing that I hadn't realised, which is this story also in Matthew, or
Yes.
it's in another gospel,
It's
right?
in Matthew and in John. Yeah.
Okay, so I feel like the emphasis in those stories is that the disciples were really struggling in the storm. I think you could read this version as the disciples were like straining against the oars, but it was Jesus that terrified them. So the problem, a little bit like you're saying, you know, what has God done to me is hit me on the chin kind of thing.
Right.
The disciples, I don't know, maybe I'm stretching this, but it feels like you could read this passage in Mark that the disciples are doing all right. You know, they were straining against the oars, but they were fishermen, right? You know, this was like par for the course for them. And then this flipping ghost appears. And that's when they're terrified. It was Jesus that was the problem. It wasn't, you know, whereas we tell it as, oh, they were in this terrible storm and wasn't it awful? And then Jesus came and it took him a while, but after a little bit he fixed it. So that's kind of weird.
I realised that I said earlier that he went out to help them because he saw they were straining at the oars. But actually he was about to walk past them.
Yeah, I
That's
think
true. That's true. Yes. Yeah. That's.
So what is this story?
So that's the other absence. That's right. I forgot about that.
he was about to pass them by. Yeah. I mean, they were all right. They were doing their thing. They were straining against the oars. He was out for a walk, and then he could have walked somewhere else so he didn't scare them. Maybe that would have been better. He just needed to get to the other side, and he didn't have a boat, so off he walked. And maybe he didn't, you know, actually intend to get in the boat.
But he was close. He was close.
But
to
they
them.
got so scared.
Yeah. And it's not even like he's waiting for them to ask. Like, there's another surface reading I wouldn't like. Then, you know, he was almost about to pass them by because he's waiting for them to ask. Just like the thing in Lamentation that we just heard, you know, like, oh, you're struggling, but you now make the conscious decision to change your mind, and now you're asking, and then Lord will bring you prosperity. But that's not what the story says.
Yeah, no.
He was
That's not
about
what
to.
Lamentation says either, surely.
Okay, cool. He was about to. It must. Yeah, he was about to pass them when they thought he was a ghost. They cried out and they were terrified. And Jesus just spoke to them and said, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." They say nothing, and then he climbs into the boat with them.
Yeah.
So he's scaring them with his presence. They don't say anything, and he helps them out without them even saying. A bit like the 5 loaves and 2 fishes, where he says, they say to him, "What shall we do? You know, send the people away." They don't say, "Make us enough bread for 5,000 people, please. Conjure this up." They say, "Send them away," and he says, "Just collect what we have," and then something happens.
So, by the way, I think I should step in at this point for the benefit of the listener, as Rory Stewart would say. That the version of this story in Matthew has the bit that you're probably wondering where it is, which is where Peter gets out of the boat and walks towards Jesus, right? So it's just not there in Mark. That's why we're not reading it.
It's not in Mark, yeah. And John has a different condensed version of the story that also doesn't have Peter coming out. Matthew wanted to give Peter an extra scene here because there's a bit of a Peter thing in Matthew. It's good for particular church politics, but.
I think this is a story. This is a story. Yeah. Let's just glossing over that. This is a story about Jesus being weird and ghostly, and I'm coming around to your ghostly idea, Jörg. It's Jesus walking out there on the water without any particular intention to interact with them. Maybe even he was going to pass them by, and then.
So here's another reading of that. Sorry, Lee, had you finished what you were saying?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm confused myself now.
So here's another reading of this. Seeing Jesus as his fully human self, he was exhausted by just the number of people and all the pressure on him. He needed to get away. He went and prayed in the mountains and refreshed himself and spent time with God. And then he wanted to hang out with his disciples. He saw them and he thought, I'm going to walk past them and be close to them.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily like go and get in the boat, but just I want to be with them. Like I've had enough of withdrawing.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be with my friends. And then they spot him and he ends up in the boat, and that's not such a bad outcome. But maybe he was just going to walk behind them for a bit and just be close to them. Maybe he wasn't quite done with solitude, but he also felt the draw to his friends.
But even the interpretation that Jesus needs solitude, as didactic as it may be for our own spiritual practice and all of that, it's not in this verse. And why couldn't he, like in Gethsemane, take his disciples with you and say, you wait over there, we need to pray. Like teach them solitude. He says, you go on ahead.
He very definitely sends them off, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's just like, you go off now.
But I think it's in the passage. Like obviously it's not like massively in the passage, but it feels, on reading this, it feels like he needed to get away to me. And I think if we accept Jesus as human, he would have needs like that, same as he had needs to eat food and stuff, right?
Yeah. I guess I'm already sort of in a headspace where I'm reading the story largely allegorical of the church sharing this experience of this kind of Jesus there, Jesus.
Okay.
Jesus not.
I don't think it works. I don't think it works for that, does it? I don't think there's anything in the Bible that says sometimes God gets tired of us and needs a break.
Correct. Yeah, it doesn't work.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I like that with regard to the Old Testament. Like I like the anthropology. I like the anthropology of God in the Old Testament. He's so human. He is jealous.
Yeah.
He thinks Israel is his bride. It's like, I mean, sorry, this very masculine image, but it's a very human image. A very earthen image as such.
So I also like that, but I don't like it as an image of God. I like it as a way of engaging with God, which is different. Right? Sorry, go on.
No, finish that because I haven't found another problem.
Well, that's it basically. Like the reason why I really like the Old Testament stuff where God behaves really badly is not because I think God is like that, but because I think it's actually quite helpful for us as humans to engage with God in that way and say, look, why have you done this? And why is stuff like this?
Right.
And God, I think God is okay with us talking like that to them.
Yeah, and that's what you do in your prayers, right? And I think that's where this sort of anthropomorphic image of God can actually be helpful, because we then almost get a sense that he's doing that. Like instead of this, like God is always good and everything else in the world is evil, so therefore the question is only why God's not breaking through. But if it all comes from him, you can complain to him about everything. I really like that.
Yeah.
Okay, do you want to hear another problem, a ghostly problem?
Yeah, go on.
Where does Jesus send them to and where do they land? So these towns, so Bethsaida, I was just looking up at the map, it's like in the north of the Sea of Galilee. But they land in Gennesaret, which is sort of off course. So he doesn't even fix it. He's like, go ahead of Bethsaida.
Oh, I see. So they don't go to the place where
they don't go to the place where they sent them, where he told them to go.
Right. So he didn't really fix things.
Well, at least he changed his mind or something. And I was just looking where they set out. So they went across the lake to a quiet place. So we don't quite hear in Mark where this was. That's a nightmare for tourist guide. Do you want to show where the multiplying of the loaves and the fish has happened? Sure, there must be a site. And so people run around the lake. Yeah, it's right. Yeah, that's good for many tourists. So they run around the lake, and many factions within Christianity. This is the real one. Yeah. There's two places of the crucifixion already, so we can multiply those other spots as well. Yeah, so everybody runs around the lake because they've rowed across, so that's possible. Then they have the miracle of the loaves and the fishes, and then Jesus sends them off to Bethsaida. They struggle against the oar, they get blown off course. Jesus comes in the boat and takes them to where they weren't meant to be, and there he heals everybody.
Yeah, so what about the people in Bethsaida who wanted healing?
Yep.
Yeah, and where is the kind of masterful power of Jesus if they actually got completely blown off course?
Hmm.
They didn't fix it. Good.
He did fix it for the people in Gennesaret, but not so great for the people in Bethsaida who weren't so well.
Yeah.
I think that's it. I think it's like we started. It's kind of pointing up that even when the ultimate Son of God is in town, there's still like huge issues in terms of people's access to what some Christians consider, you know, our kind of right, which is to be healed and to have our problems fixed. Even then, even in that situation, there was still an awful lot of people who experienced an absence of God. People who might have had a presence of God, had the wind blown in a different direction, experienced an absence of God. And
again, to walk that same circle again, maybe for the benefit of a listener and taking it apart again, then the message of the sermon would have to be, accept these limitations because the ghost is the real thing. We want everything fixed. We don't see Jesus clearly. We don't really always understand what it is. The ghost is the real thing. Once you let that into the boat, that is only ever going to be partial, that you have those beautiful moments with another human being, but you're never going to change the structure. That will bring calmness to your heart. And then I stumble because I say, well, surely that can't be the message, because what do I do with Gaza? What do I do with Ukraine?
The last bit, the last phrase where you said, that will bring calmness to your heart. They were like, no, that will bring a peace that puts you out of the picture and allows you to get on with doing those little trivial things and bigger not so trivial things and all the things that we value as justice warriors, because you're not so wedded to me and whether I'm having an impact.
So you allow yourself to be blown off course, because in the end it doesn't matter, because like Cloud Atlas, you're just playing out a story.
It's not about the story of liberation. But you're not. You might not notice the liberation that you bring. It might feel like you've utterly... Like, think of all those French resistance fighters, just to pick one that comes to mind, in them, you know, who died in like 1942. It was dire. Everything was terrible, and was that wasted? Was that awful? No, it was awful, but it wasn't wasted. And think of all those struggles right now of people who are doing. There are people right this moment who are carrying out acts of immense courage and bravery and beauty and love in the middle of towns in Gaza. That the people that they're doing that towards might be dead tomorrow, but that's not wasted. But it feels, I'm sure, utterly without hope.
This all leads me back to the question of, like, what does it mean to trust God, right? If we reject the idea that trusting God means you get prosperity because you believe the right things or you say the right things or whatever, then what are you left with? And maybe there's a picture here of something a bit like that, which is like the act of trusting God is kind of recognizing that the ghost is actually Jesus, or like that recognizing Jesus is at work despite the storm, making it look like there's nothing. But also, when Jesus gets in the boat, you then end up somewhere you never thought you would. Yeah. And he doesn't just make it all back to how it should be.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right to pick me up on this this peaceful landing on the calmness. You actually need to end in the wrong place in the story and in the sermon, because the answer is you got to finish with a ghost. Is it enough that there are charities helping children that will be dead tomorrow? No, it's not. Because Jesus is a ghost. You're never, we're not peddling this, do the one thing and it'll all be fulfilled. No.
Right.
It's
not a formula for fixing the world.
Yeah. Exactly. And by accepting the ghost in the boat, you're also committing yourself to a journey that on the one hand you won't fully understand, and that will keep driving you further. And it's not to say now everything is fixed, but you're saying yes to the ghostliness of God's presence, and that's a really, really hard ask, and maybe one that needs silence.
Yeah, and I just think this is such a crucial message for our really current times, because I think you go in one direction, which is, yes, we need to be justice warriors. We need to be out there fixing the problems of the world. We need to be, taking these things on. We need to be fighting them. And that can send you in this whole direction of how important my agency is, and if I can just spend enough time in silence before God, and if I can just pray hard enough, I can make these things happen. Or you go to the other extreme, which is that I'm so insignificant and everything I do makes so little difference, so I'll just focus on my personal relationship with God, because that can bring me satisfaction, and maybe it can make a very small amount of blessing to my immediate family or the town in which I live, because all that other stuff is way too big. And but there's a place that I think the church needs to discover with some urgency right now in this moment, which is, what does the church have to say to a world possibly on the brink of some really, obviously in lots of parts of the world it's already incredibly hard, but to a Western church that's so fond of measurable outcomes and what's my impact, and if I give money here, what will it do? Will it buy 5 cows, or will it buy, you know how all the marketing goes. We're so wedded to these ideas of impact and agency that we go in one of the two extreme directions because we don't feel that we're having that impact and agency. And what does the church have to say to those people and to say to us? What are we being called to? What's this path, this journey that we're being called to walk that is relevant to things maybe getting worse?
And Jesus is almost walking by the boat, because that's a hard message, right? Yeah. It's one interesting message to just let him walk by the boat, just say, this is not for me, that it's just a trick, it's a mirage, it's an illusion, this idea. And it's another thing to be saying, oh, there comes Jesus, he's going to fix it. But actually, you got to say yes to the ghost coming in the boat, because it's not the solution that comes walking. The waves don't calm when he walks toward the boat. Wow. Take courage at his eye. Don't be afraid. You got to embrace the unknowing.
It's kind of decentering them there, isn't it? Like, like it's not all about you. Don't worry, kind of thing.
Yeah, it is I. Oh, thanks, guys.
I really feel like on the topic of like recognizing that this ghost is the real Jesus, this woman that you encountered, Jörg, like maybe it meant nothing to her, maybe it was she just managed to con another tourist, but maybe there was a moment where she felt respect and human connection that was a really important moment in her life, even if she died the next day, and maybe you got to be part of like a good thing that happened in the world. Yes, but
more ghostly than that for me. I do. So she was not a con. She was a really old, really shrunk together lady, and I mean, she would have seen all the hardship. Who knows what washed up in Addis Ababa? We didn't have a conversation, and she was just working her shift. But the fact that a foreigner, a white man, and this was when, you were still getting called out as a foreigner in Addis Ababa, was speaking Amharic back to her and was saying, God bless you, mother, as an Ethiopian would, and gave her sort of the bit at Sunteam. It wasn't about the money. It was that moment. I do not for once believe that this was an important moment in her life, but it was a ghostly moment of fleeting. Maybe it was, but it doesn't matter. Like, that's the point. I mean, that's the point of that ghostliness. Like, I need to accept that I let Jesus in the boat, because all of our moments are actually just these little fractions. And our propensity to want to tell one story where everything's happy end in the end.
Yes, we don't want to center you in this narrative as the person who made this great difference to this woman. Yeah,
that's one problem, and the other problem is that that woman doesn't have one story. There isn't this, like, even like in the overall, like what Leah said, the overarching scheme of things. It's not that we should trust in like one action making such a huge difference, and that doesn't invalidate the action. It still makes that such an amazing glimpse of the kingdom of God if we can accept the ghostly presence of Jesus and decenter ourselves and say, I'm participating. Again, I love the Cloud Atlas story, Leah. Maybe you should preach this message. the Cloud Atlas story, like, I am participating in a larger thing right now. It's not about me. It's maybe not even about the woman, but it's about that presence that emerged from that very encounter that is dear, and that brings a calmness to the destruction around us. That's a vision of something else that could be and maybe sometimes is.
So I think you've opened up at least a whole other podcast for me on whether seeing the cross as like a pivotal single action is something that we should deconstruct.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is why I think the resurrection is the story. It's not the cross. Like, the cross lends you in penal substitution. The cross is the riddle, and the resurrection is the ghostly answer. Like, totally with you. I mean, that's that.
Yeah,
like,
so let's not go there. Let's not go there.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. All right. Oh, this has been fun.
I'm thinking we might be at the end of our conversation. We had a bit to read.
Great. And by the way, I'm not going to put any of this in the sermon. I'm just going to give this sort of Jesus' power of everything, because I can't fit this into 20 minutes. And I'll just say, if you want to hear what I really think, just listen to this. So.
I was going to say, I'm really hoping that I get to listen to the sermon and you sort it all out, because I'm like so confused now. All right, listener. Well, we know by now, if you're on episode 43, you like to be confused and unsatisfied. So we're going to finish off with something as confusing and unsatisfying as the rest of the podcast, which is the lyrics of the song "The Sound of Silence" by Simon and Garfunkel, which I had never heard before. I'd heard the first line, and yeah. Anyway, listen. Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again. Because a vision softly creeping left its seeds while I was sleeping, and the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence. In restless dreams I walked alone, narrow streets of cobblestone. Neath the halo of a street lamp, turned my collar to the cold and damp when my eyes were stabbed by the flash of a neon light that split the night and touched the sound of silence. And in the naked light I saw 10,000 people, maybe more, people talking without speaking, people hearing without listening, people writing songs that voices never shared, and no one dared disturb the sound of silence. Fool, said I, you do not know, silence like a cancer grows. Hear my words that I might teach you, take my arms that I might reach you. But my words like silent raindrops fell, and echoed in the wells of silence. And the people bowed and prayed to the neon god they made, and the sign flashed out its warning in the words that it was forming, and the sign said, the words of the prophets are written on the subway walls and tenement halls, and whispered in the sound of silence. Thanks very much, Jörg, for sharing the struggle of your sermon preparation with us.
Pleasure. Thanks for helping me sort it out into something more complicated and more uncontrollable.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, listener. See you next time.
See you.
You've been listening to Justice Warriors. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you can also follow us on social media by searching for Justice Warriors, where warrior is spelt like someone who worries about things. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a rating, since that helps other people find us. Also, please tell your friends about us in real life. We'd love to hear from you. To get in touch, use the email address in the show notes or contact us via the social media links. Thanks for listening.
Told ya. Now you're under control. Now you're under control. Now you're under control. Killing in the name of. Killing in the name of. Killing in the name of. You kill.